When we get to the book of Joshua, which we're going to read the first several verses together, what we find is actually that Abraham has been made a promise by God. And so when they get here to the promised land where Joshua is taking over, they are actually arriving on the scene of a place where God had met with Abraham before. Abraham left Ur. It's Ur of the Chaldeans. And so Abraham leaves Ur and he arrives in a town called Shechem there in the land of Canaan. And God makes a promise to Abraham there in the land of Canaan that to your offspring, to your descendants, and to your offspring, which we learned later really is a hint at Jesus, the offspring of Abraham. But God makes a promise to Abraham there in the land of Canaan that to your offspring I will give this land. And so this land was a promise that God had made to Abraham that Joshua was going to lead the people of Israel into, and they were finally going to receive a promise made to their ancestors some 400 or more years before that. This promise was not only mentioned to Abraham, but even also to Moses. And even as they wander through the wilderness, the people of Israel are actually saved and delivered from slavery in Egypt. They make their wandering through the wilderness, and then they make their way to that promised land. And over the course of that exodus out of Egypt, God repeats that promise to them. I'm taking you to a land that I promised to your forefather. I'm taking you to a land that is a good land, a land that is flowing with milk and honey. So Moses led those people out of Egypt. He led the children of Israel there, and they make their way for that 40 years as I described. We talked a little bit about this last week as well. And so they get there to the brink of this land that God had promised. It's the promised land, or it's the land of Canaan, or just Canaan. And so as they get there, Moses, having been a faithful servant of the Lord, did actually depart from being faithful to the Lord and actually is not allowed to go into the promised land. And so Moses actually passes away just before they go into the promised land. And God tells Moses to actually install Joshua as the next leader for the children of Israel who would become the nation of Israel. Install Joshua as the leader and have Joshua take them into the promised land, and there they're going to take the land that I am giving to them. So that's where we pick up this scene. They've made their way out of slavery from Egypt. They've made their way through the wilderness. They are now on the brink of the promised land. They're looking at the Jordan River, which would take them into that promised land, and Moses has passed away. Joshua is the new leader. All right, let's read that together. Joshua chapter 1, verse 1. We're going to read all the way through verse 9. It says, after the death of Moses, the Lord's servant, the Lord spoke to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' assistant. And he said, Moses, my servant, is dead. Therefore, the time has come for you to lead these people, the Israelites, across the Jordan River into the land that I am giving them. Now, next week, I'm going to talk about this phrase, the land that I am giving them. That is so good that it deserves its own message. Well, let's get into verse 3. I promise you what I promised Moses, and that's what I want to talk about today. Wherever you set your foot, you will be on land that I have given you. From the Negev wilderness in the south to the Lebanon mountains in the north, from the Euphrates River in the east to the Mediterranean Sea in the west, including all the land of the Hittites. No one will be able to stand against you as long as I live, for I will be with you as I was with Moses. I will not fail you or abandon you. Be strong and courageous, for you are the one who will lead these people to possess all the land that I swore to their ancestors that I would give them. Be strong and courageous. Be careful to obey all the instructions Moses gave you. Don't deviate from them, turning either to the right or to the left, and then you will be successful in everything you do. Study this book of instruction continually. Meditate on it day and night so that you will be sure to do everything that is written in it. And only then will you prosper and succeed in all that you do. This is my command. God to Joshua, be strong, be courageous, do not be afraid, do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. As we study this passage, it's an introduction to Joshua. It's an introduction to God as he instructs Joshua, and it's even a charge from God to Joshua to be strong and courageous on the basis of his promise of his presence. I will be with you. And this promise of God's presence is supposed to inspire Joshua with courage, that God is with me, I can be strong, I can be courageous. So let's talk for just a second about who Joshua is. I gave a little bit of background to how they came to the promised land through that whole wilderness wandering and Moses leading them. But Joshua first appears in the Bible, actually in Exodus chapter 17. He's the leader of the Israelite defense against the Amalekites. So there's a huge battle. Joshua is the leader of that battle. Joshua's also Moses' assistant. So he's with Moses there on Sinai as God communicates to Moses so frequently. Joshua is often there, either by his side or not too far away as Moses makes his way deeper into the cloud or deeper into that presence of God. But Joshua is usually there with Moses. He's also one of the 12 spies. There's a story that you would see if you read some of the books leading up to Joshua, but there's a story where Moses sends 12 spies into the promised land to see what it's like, to see what they think, to bring back a report. God is giving us this land, so what's it going to take? Well, these spies go in, and 10 of them say, there's no way we can do this. We're out. We're out of our minds, and we're crazy. There's no way. We should not move forward. But 2 of those spies said, are you guys kidding? This is the land that God's giving us. We can take over. We've got God on our side. There's nothing we can do. It's a beautiful land. It's great. It's everything God promised. We can do everything God said. And these 2 men were full of faith. One was Caleb. The other was Joshua. Joshua was full of faith. And so Caleb and Joshua were the only ones in their generation that didn't die in the wilderness. All the others had passed away because of their lack of faith. And God allows Caleb and Joshua to enter into the promised land, and Joshua is the leader of the Israelites. So this is Joshua. Joshua is Moses' successor. Joshua had been explicitly commissioned by Moses as his long-term assistant, and also positioning him really next in line for leadership. So this position was formalized by the laying on of hands. This really is a lot like you would see in a commissioning service where you might actually commission a deacon or an elder or something like that, where maybe you've seen that in church before. But through the laying on of hands, Joshua was commissioned to be the next leader. And so of all of these things about Joshua, commissioned to be the leader, a great warrior, he actually stands in the gap for Moses and defends Moses when the people actually want to get rid of Moses, or at least they want to talk negatively about Moses. Joshua stands in the gap. He's faithful to God. But there's one thing that I want to talk about today. It's the presence of God. And I want you to see that deep in Joshua's heart, at his core, was a commitment to the presence of God, was a longing for it, a desire for that. And I think that that's what drives his courage. I think that's what drives his boldness. I really think that's what actually positions him as the next qualified leader. His commitment, devotion, wholehearted trust in God. Now, I find that in Exodus 33:11. This has been a bit of a life verse for me since college, so it's a verse that's personal to me. And we talk about the presence of God at Anchor, I don't know, at least several times a year. And I almost always talk about this verse, but to me, this is what stands out about Joshua. Now, everyone knows this verse because of the first half. I want you to see the second half, all right? So here's the first half of Exodus chapter 33:11. Inside the tent of meeting, the Lord would speak to Moses face to face as one speaks to a friend. You see that? That's amazing. That's in and of itself just incredible. But I want you to see what is next and what is said about Joshua. So God speaks to Moses face to face as one speaks to a friend. And after they talked, Moses would return to the camp, but the young man who assisted him, Joshua, son of Nun, would remain behind in the tent of meeting. I can't say why. I can only say why I might have wanted to do that. Joshua lingers there where he notices the presence of God. Moses talks to him face to face. Joshua gets to hear about it, see it. Somehow he's there. And then Moses leaves and Joshua lingers. Isn't there something about a heart that wants to linger in the presence of God just a little bit longer? I want us as a church to develop a desire for worship, a desire for the presence of God, that we would be like Joshua, who for whatever reason lingers there in the tent of meeting where the presence of God met with Moses. And for us, I think that would commend us higher than anything else we might imagine would commend us for service to God. Not your talents, not your abilities, and you not even disqualify your lack of talent or your lack of abilities. I think what commends each one of us to God for his use, for his service, would be that we linger in his presence. We desire his presence. We make space for it. We stay there a little longer, and we plead with God to meet with us. Nothing's going to happen this Joshua sermon series if at our core we're not committed to that. If at our core there's not a growing desire to be in and linger in the presence of God. Now, I say we do that alone, and I think we ought to do that in community with other people. We should desire the presence of God above all else in our lives. And so that to me is what commends Joshua. And to be honest, I think that would commend any of us to God. God would say, as we talked about last week, remember that verse in the Old Testament where he says that the eyes of the Lord are running to and fro throughout the earth to see whose hearts are full, to be strong on behalf of those whose hearts are fully committed to him. That to me is Joshua. And so when we look at all the military conquests of Joshua and all the military, the strategic brilliance of Joshua and all the other things that he's, we would give due honor for, we have to trace it all back to this, where Joshua lingers in and desires the presence of God. So I want that to be the main point. And as I think about how Joshua was chosen, I think about all the things that are characteristic of Joshua, all the things that we might praise about Joshua. And for me, I think that these kinds of things can be true of really any of us. They're certainly true of Jesus. So as we make our way through Joshua, I'm not going to pretend that I'm Joshua, and I'm not going to pretend that you're Joshua. We're going to learn from Joshua, but what we're going to realize is that Jesus is the true Joshua. And that when we're joined with Jesus, we can do all that the Holy Spirit of Jesus, the Holy Spirit of Christ, wants to do in us. I can finally become who I was made to be when I let the Spirit of Christ do his work in me. When I let the real Joshua, Jesus, my Savior and Deliverer, when I let him fill me with his Spirit, give me his charge and his command, share with me his calling on my life, and then just like Joshua did, completely devoted to him, obey him every step of the way. This is true for any of us. This could be true. I think when we look at the way that he was chosen, it wasn't just arbitrary. There's a couple of things about Joshua that I think stand out. And so look with me quickly at Numbers chapter 27. Numbers 27, verse 18, it says, the Lord replied, take Joshua the son of Nun, and look at this, who has the Spirit in him, and lay your hands on him. What is it about Joshua that stands out when the Lord tells Moses to take this man, to lay your hands on him and commission him as the next leader? It is precisely that Joshua has the Spirit of God in him. Lay your hands on him, he says. And then verse 19, present him to Eleazar the priest before the whole community and publicly commission him to lead the people. Transfer some of your authority to him, which is the idea of laying hands on someone, so that the whole community of Israel will obey him. So it's not just arbitrary. Here's a man devoted to the presence of God, passionately lingering in the presence of God to taste just a little bit more of that glory, to taste just a little bit more of heaven as he's there in the presence of God, just near the presence of God. He's filled with his Spirit. And then the next thing is that he's shown a consistent pattern of wholehearted devotion to God, not just in the worship service, but in other areas of his life. Numbers chapter 32 says this in verse 12, the only exceptions to the ones who are not going to be allowed to go into the promised land are Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, and Joshua, son of Nun, for they have wholeheartedly followed the Lord. So do you need to go to West Point to be a follower of God? Joshua had his own military training, didn't he? You don't have to go to any particular school. You don't have to have any particular battle training. You don't have to have any particular gift. You don't have to be like anyone else. The things that set Joshua apart can be the very things that set any one of us apart. They are this, that he desires the presence of God in his life, that he's filled with the Spirit, and that he's wholeheartedly devoted to God in every area of his life. Is there anyone in this room or watching online for which that cannot be true? No. This can be true of any one of us, particularly because of what Jesus has done for us to save us, to redeem us, to give us his Spirit. We have everything because of what Christ has done, the Father's love, the Son's sacrifice and intercession on our behalf, and the Spirit's power and presence with us. We have everything we need to be, as the body of Christ, a modern day Joshua to the nations. Every single one of us and every single local church. And so I'm encouraging you to be inspired by that, to think about that. Caleb and Joshua are allowed to go in. Joshua, though, is installed as the leader of the Israelites as they go into the promised land. They lay hands on Joshua. He's commissioned. And as I mentioned before, you've seen that with deacons or elders as they commission someone to be a leader in the church or something like that. When you look, just quickly, when you look at like 1 Timothy or Titus, those books in the New Testament, where we get an outline of what the leaders of the church are supposed to look like, I don't know about you, but when I read those, they look pretty ordinary to me. He needs to manage himself. He can't be fighting people all the time, arguing with people all the time. He needs to manage his home, so he needs to care for his wife and his children. He needs to be able to teach other people the good news of Jesus. He needs to be able to share that and make disciples. Is there anyone that really shouldn't be aspiring to those kinds of things? Would we say that, okay, we actually want our elders to actually, and deacons, we want them to be upstanding people filled with the Spirit, listening to God and managing their own heart, shepherding themselves and shepherding their families and leading others as they make disciples, but we don't want anyone else doing that. Doesn't make any sense, does it? Apparently, the leaders in the church are just the ones that excel at what every one of us should be doing, at what every one of us should aspire to. And that is sort of tracing me back to Joshua, realizing that, at the core of what was true about Joshua, he had some military brilliance that I don't have. Sure, he had some knowledge and saw some things that I haven't seen. There's things about Joshua that really do set him apart. So I'm not even trying to be like Joshua or compare myself to him. And neither should we really be comparing ourselves to each other. But the fact remains that at the core of what was true of Joshua, those things can be true about us too. We can be wholeheartedly devoted to God. We can plead with him to fill us with his Spirit and be walking in his Spirit. And we can be accomplishing all that God wants to accomplish for us too. So as I say that and as I think about that, I want to move us into a little bit into this presence of God. Joshua chapter 1 and verse 5. No one will be able to stand against you as long as you live, for I will be with you as I was with Moses. I will not fail you. I will not abandon you. This promise to Joshua here in chapter 1, verse 5, really there are several promises there in verse 5. Did you notice that? There's a few things that I think are true. The Israelites, for sure, they would be attacked and they would withstand those attacks and they would continue to advance into the land. But God was promising that regardless of any resistance or regardless of the setbacks, that God would be with him and that no one would be able to stand against them. So as I think about this, that promise begins here, Joshua chapter 1, verse 5. No one will be able to stand against you as long as you live. This is a promise God's making to Joshua. And just like I've mentioned just a second ago about Jesus being our true Joshua, a couple of weeks ago, I actually mentioned a little bit about the promised land in the study of Joshua, where I believe Jesus is our true Joshua. I believe that the promised land is not just one plot of land, but it's all the plots of land. Jesus says in the Great Commission to his disciples something that sounds so similar to the commission that God gives to Joshua. Jesus says that all authority has been given to me. Not just authority to lead a small set of tribes, one nation into a promised land, but all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me, and I want you to go and make disciples of all nations. So the promise really gets expanded in Jesus as we think about how Joshua might apply to us today. And so when I think about this, like Joshua, he gives him Jesus gives us a commission to actually be going out and to spreading this gospel, to be making disciples in all nations. And so for us, the hostile takeover, as we read in Joshua, for us today is a lot less like bringing death to the nations for their disobedience and bringing good news of Jesus Christ, bringing life to these people. Through our death, we're the ones that are going to die. We're the ones that are going to follow the pattern of our Savior Jesus and sacrificially lay down our lives for the good of others so that they can hear the good news of Jesus Christ and receive the life that is now available to them through the good news of Jesus Christ. You see how it just kind of got turned on its head? There's so much, we wouldn't have time to do that today, but there's so much in the Old Testament that when you come to Christ in the New Testament, just kind of gets turned on its head a little bit. And we realize that the things of the Old Testament are expanding, that everything is now true because of Jesus, and Jesus has fulfilled all those things. And so there are new realities in Christ for us that we're going to unpack as we study Joshua. And of course, one of those is that we are to take over not just one plot of land, but the good news of Jesus Christ through the body of Christ, empowered by the Spirit of Christ, with the word of Christ, is to take over nation by nation by nation. So that everyone, every man, every woman, every boy, every girl can hear the good news of Jesus Christ. And so that we can be making disciples of people from every tongue, every tribe, every nation. So I think for us, when we hear that promise that God made to Joshua, there is some resonance there, even in the gospel, where God tells Joshua, hey, everywhere you go, every place you set your foot, I'm giving it to you. And then he even says, no one is going to be able to withstand you, Joshua, all the days of your life. And it reminds me even of Jesus, not just the Great Commission, where Jesus says, I'm going to be with you wherever you go, so go and make disciples of all nations. But Jesus even says that I'm going to build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against my church. My church will be on the advance. My church will be growing. I will be building my church, and my kingdom will be spreading. It's sort of an underground kingdom. It's an underground movement, but it will be spreading throughout the nations. And this is the promise for us today, that nothing can stand against the advance of the gospel of Jesus Christ as it makes its way from disciple to disciple, from nation to nation. Guys, we should be pumped up about that. Nothing hindered it from making its way to you, and nothing will hinder it from making its way to people around the world. And so I want us as a people to be committed to that idea. Nothing can oppose the good news of Jesus Christ. Now, that's not to say that we don't face opposition. That's not to say that we won't face trials or suffering or opposition or persecution. Even the children of Israel, as they're led by Joshua into the promised land, what we're going to notice is they find all kinds of opposition. They have to fight all kinds of battles. But what we realize is that because of Jesus for us, when we face those same kind of trials and that same kind of opposition, we can remain confident in Him, and we can overcome those trials and those kinds of oppositions through faith. That's exactly what I think John is trying to tell us. So we'll just quickly show this verse. 1 John chapter 5, verse 4 tells us how to do that. For every child of God defeats this evil world. We are in a battle, by the way. Every child of God defeats this evil world, and we achieve this victory. How? Through our faith. Faith. It's definitely a war, definitely a battle. It's a spiritual battle. We learn in Ephesians that we're not fighting against flesh and blood. There are powers and principalities that are guiding all of these kinds of things that we see in the world today. We are fighting a spiritual battle. And for us, the way to overcome would be through faith. Faith in what? I mean, I just gave you a really long introduction to the presence of God. Hint, hint. Faith in what? Faith in God's presence, the promise of His presence, that He will be with us. So it doesn't matter what I go through. I could go through the highest of highs and be as successful as maybe I might imagine. And I am going to need faith if I'm going to endure that kind of success. And I could be going through the lowest of lows, low as I could ever imagine I'd be going through. And I am still going to need faith to overcome in that situation. Faith. It's always the victory. That's how we overcome. And that's what we need is faith in God's presence with us. So God says back to Joshua 1:5, no one will be able to stand against you as long as you live. I will be with you as I was with Moses. Isn't that beautiful? I will be with you as I was with Moses, and I will not forsake you. I will not fail you. I will not abandon you. And as I think about just the idea of overcoming through faith, probably what most of us fear, I guess maybe our greatest fear for some of us might be that God has abandoned us, or that God might abandon us, that we might have become forgotten, that for all of my praying, God seems to not be listening, he might not care, and he may have left me on my own. Joshua needed this promise that I'll be with you, and we need that promise too. We need to hear that. And do you know why we need to hear that? And do you know why, on what basis we can hear that and be assured today that God will never leave us, never forsake us, that he will not abandon us? It's because of what Jesus has done. Everything just kind of makes its way back to Jesus. Because of what Jesus has done for us. Because he was forsaken. Because he actually, on the cross, is enduring the wrath of God for us, because he is sacrificing himself in our place for our sins. Jesus is the one who actually says, my God, why have you what? Forsaken me. Jesus fully experienced what he came to save us from. So that because of Jesus, though I may endure all kinds of trials and hardship and suffering, I will never be finally or fully forsaken by God or ever condemned by God because of what Jesus has done for me. So the promise of God's presence is real to us because of Jesus. It's precisely because of Jesus that we will never be forsaken, that we will never be abandoned. And so as I think about that, that's what we need, is an incredible faith, an incredible confidence that God, and through his Spirit, will always be present with us. He will never leave us. He will never forsake us. And that really is what leads us into the idea that we can be strong and we can be courageous. Joshua 1:6 is the next verse where he says, be strong and courageous, for you're the one who will lead these people to possess the land that I swore to their ancestors that I would give them. So as we think about this, we get these promises where God says, I'm going to be with you, and then I want you to be strong and courageous. And sometimes I think as a charge, we hear about being strong and courageous more than the idea of the presence of God. And so I want us to actually see that when God gives Joshua that charge to be strong and courageous, it's actually on the basis of the promise of the presence of God. Because God is with you, because he will never leave you, because his presence is there with you, because he's providing for you, because he's protecting you, because of his power, you can be strong, you can be courageous. This is true only in light of the promise of God's presence. And so God's not encouraging Joshua to take confidence in his own strength. He's not telling him to be courageous because of his own strategy, but that he needs to have courage, that God was going to keep his promises. He needs to have courage and be strong, that God's going to fight this battle. He needs to have courage, that he needs to follow the instructions of the Lord, even if they sound crazy, like we're going to talk about when he goes into the battle of Jericho, and they just walk around the city for 7 days. Some of it's going to sound crazy, some of it's going to sound wild, but Joshua, if you'll listen, and if you'll be strong and courageous, follow me, and I will be with you. You see that? I mean, it's just no greater promise than the presence of God in the Bible. So God was going to deliver this land to them, and all Joshua and the people needed was to believe it. Now, given everything that Joshua had seen and experienced in the wilderness, I think that he had plenty of evidence that God would be with him, didn't he? God wasn't asking him, think about this now, God was not asking Joshua to believe something that he hadn't already seen to be true in his own life. When he says, I want you to remember that I'm going to be with you just like I was with Moses, is he not sort of indicating that I'm going to be with you in ways that you have seen before? For me, as I think about that means that you and I are never going to be compelled by the promise of God's presence until we can look back and see a pattern of God's presence in our life. Too often, we are afraid and discouraged because we are not taking stock in the presence of God as he has shown himself faithful in our lives in the past. We are forgetting that. We are overlooking that. And the promise that God will be with us isn't just a promise about the future. It's a promise about all the ways that he has in fact been faithful to us up to this point. And I think some of us need to take some inventory. I mean, how long has it been? There was an old hymn that we used to sing, and I could sing it for you, but God called me to preach, not to sing. And so I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that for you. I'm not even going to do it for you later, like in the lobby or somewhere else. Just don't even try. There's an old song that talks about just counting your many blessings, right? Count your blessings one by one. Count your many blessings. And for us, if we're going to believe in the presence of God, if we're going to look ahead and see the obstacles and be challenged to believe that God will be with us, we're going to need to take inventory of all the ways that he has been present with us and all the ways that he has been present in the lives of God's people. And we're going to need to borrow some of that confidence as we go into the next battle, as we go into those next set of circumstances. We need to believe that he has been present. Unfortunately for me, when I'm challenged with an obstacle, I'm not giving God enough credit for the ways that he has provided for me up to this point. I'm just failing to be grateful. And I don't want that to be true of us. You're never going to be compelled by the idea of God's presence with us, the promise of his presence, if we don't take stock in, if we don't take inventory, if we don't look back and remember the pattern of his presence in our life. Can you look back? Can you see ways that God has provided for you? You need to take some time to allow this to be a strong enough realization that you experience something in your own heart, a movement towards God in your own heart, because you're remembering again all the ways that God has protected you, all the ways that he's provided for you. You and I need to take stock in that, need to take inventory. And I think that's going to bolster our confidence in the presence of God as we continue to move forward. So, I think practically for us, as we think about the presence of God and being compelled by the presence of God, I think related to the point that I made earlier, if because of Jesus, God will never leave us or forsake us, then you and I are going to need to believe that he has never left us in the past and that he never has forsaken us in the past. You can't just believe that he's never going to do that in the future. If deep in your core you believe he has done that in the past, though. I don't think that this is an exercise that you should necessarily be doing on your own, although I think there should be some personal reflection. I think you need to be in community or at least with a counselor, but you should be unpacking all the reasons why you feel like God has not been present, has not been faithful, why you think maybe he was not, why maybe he had abandoned you or had forsaken you, and you need to unpack those stories in a safe environment, preferably with the counselor, to begin to see that no, God had never abandoned you, that he had never forsaken you, that he has always been with you. He never promised that we wouldn't go through any hardship. He had only promised that he would be there with us to go through it together. And we need to look back on all of those things and unpack those scenarios and reimagine those scenarios again. And then imagine that God was being merciful, tender towards us, loving towards us, present with us in that moment to comfort, and even present with us now to heal us from that. This is an exercise that we should be going through so that we can remember, be reminded, or just realize for the first time that God has never forsaken us. It's on that basis, with that kind of evidence, that we can look forward and say, yeah, he's not going to forsake me. He's not going to abandon me. So that's what I mean by actually taking stock in the presence of God, looking back at the pattern of God. And it's on that basis that Joshua and the people are going to need to be strong and courageous. Now, that idea of being strong and courageous occurs 3 times in this passage. Be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. The 3rd time, be very courageous. Be strong and very courageous. Do you think that God might be trying to make a point with Joshua? Well, definitely he is. And God's affirming for Joshua that it's not going to be your strength. I think because he commands him to be strong and be courageous and to not be afraid and to not be discouraged. I think it actually highlights for us the vulnerability of Joshua. It's not going to be, you're not going to just win these victories and these battles just because of sheer strength or strategy or might or brilliance. You're going to need to trust in me. You're going to need to rest in my presence. You're going to be in deep trouble at times, but you're going to need to remain strong and courageous. So as I think about this, for me, this is skipping down to verse 9. This is my command, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged. The Lord your God is with you wherever you go. What stood out to me as I was studying this verse, and I hate to make it so personal, but fear and discouragement from verse 9, where he says, be strong and courageous, don't be afraid, which is fear, and don't be discouraged or dismayed. Fear and discouragement will keep us so many times from much of what God desires for our lives. And so I don't know about you, but last year and the last 18 months or whatever, the last couple of years, I haven't been so frequently struck with fear, although at times I have, but not so frequently struck with fear as I have with discouragement. And maybe that's true for some of you guys. And I know it's not true for everyone, but whether it's fear or discouragement or something else that's holding you back, either way, all of these kinds of fears and discouragements, they're all rooted in a lack of confidence in God. And really, if we dig deep enough, they're rooted in a lack of awareness of God's presence, which I think would bring confidence. So when I'm getting into that zone where I'm feeling like I'm operating out of fear, I'm getting discouraged, then all I'm doing is failing to recognize the presence of God, failing to recognize a pattern of the presence of God in my life. So I just need to get back to that. I think for us, as I think more about this, and the idea of all that God has done for us, I want us to see that God wants to work in our lives, through our lives, as we would just continually stay focused on his presence and all that he could and would do. 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7, God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity, but of power, love, and self-discipline. Do you know that the change that we could make in the community if we really believed we had power and love, and if we could just exercise some self-discipline? We could turn the world upside down with that. So God tells Joshua, be strong, be courageous. Listen to me, follow me, pursue my spirit. And as I think about being strong and courageous for me, isn't it true that we need to be strong as we follow the presence of God? Aren't we? I mean, let's just put ourselves into these shoes. And I'm ending with these thoughts about being strong and courageous. You're going to be tempted to trust in something other than God along the way. And so you and I need to be strong. We need to be strong to stand against the constant temptation to believe the promises of our various idols. The things that we set up as ultimate realities for us. If I could just have that, if I could just get that, if I could just do that, if I could just become that, then my life would be saved. And all of these things are making promises to us. You get that house in that neighborhood. You go to that school and you get that degree. You marry that person. You do this, you do that. You become this, and I'm going to really bless you. And those idols are crying out to us for us to trust in them with all of our hearts. And is it not going to take strength to do what God's calling us to do and to follow him and him alone? It is. And is it not going to take courage? Why would we need courage? Because I think we're going to be afraid to trust God. We're going to be afraid that things won't turn out favorably if we take a step of faith. We're going to be afraid that we might fail. This kind of fear shows that we're preferring really our will over God's will. I'm still preferring and still thinking about it this way, that if I hand my life over to God, he's not going to care about me as much as I care about me. And it's going to take some real courage, some strength and some courage to just trust in God and to go where he leads us to go, to do all that he's calling us to do, to become all that he's calling us to become. So does it give a new meaning to be strong and courageous? Fight, brothers and sisters, fight. As we study the book of Joshua together, we're going to learn just how to fight. So let's pray. Lord,